Hello and welcome to the Property Mentors podcast with me, Martin Roberts, and
myself, Nicholas Wallwork.
And we're delighted to be joined by Scott Marshall from Roma Finance, who'll be putting his financial sparkle on everything we're talking about. And we're delighted to welcome back Stuart, who obviously took part in this particular episode that we're going to be talking about. And just to say, this is really, if you like, an additional thing to go alongside Property Mentors shows, which you can find obviously on YouTube and on Amazon and on other places. Yes. It's all going well.
It is. It's a good excuse to deep dive a little bit more into the numbers with Scott, and just to kind of, what we can't show on the show is a whirlwind tour, isn't it? Here we can just go into a little bit more detail, but most importantly, find out what happened next.
And the good news is we've left it a little while to give people a chance to do their thing on the projects that we visited.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're able to catch up and find out from Stuart later what happened. So if you were wondering what happened next when you watched any of the Property Mentors TV shows, then this is where you come, the Property Mentors podcast, to actually find out what happened to the people who were working with us. Did they take my advice, which they should have done? Did they take Nick's advice, which of course is always questionable?
Financial, the best way to make money.
We clearly just rib each other. It's a balanced decision. So also what we're going to be doing in this podcast is reviewing from a financial point of view with Scott's help, just the nuts and bolts from a financial point of view of the deals that, in this case, Stuart was potentially going to do, and also the deal that we introduced Stuart to. So without more ado, Stuart, good to see you again.
Thank you for inviting me down.
Well, no, fantastic. Let's remind ourselves and just take a look at the project that you were working on when we met you.
Wow, this looks interesting. It's rather different, doesn't it, this one? Not our usual
if you're into
stuff.
farming. Stuart!
Thank you for coming to see me.
Hey, good to meet you.
Good to see you, sir. Good to see you.
Yeah. Now, we've obviously know a little bit about the sort of the basics, but can you just run over them again? You own this, you bought it, it's just, and your background and what you're trying to aspire to.
Yeah.
What you're sort
well,
of
my original background was equestrian developments. I was a jockey for many years.
Oh, right.
Oh, really? Wow.
And
successful?
Well, I was okay, but a little bit big, as you can see. Yeah. And then got into. I wanted to create a hobby, so I bought a property to do up. That did really well, and then aspired to get into property. Great opportunity, I think. But obviously, I'll be really intrigued to see what you think.
So this then is what?
This is the Class Q.
Okay.
So we're now stood in the bedrooms. There's 3 bedrooms in here, 2 bathrooms, 1 family bathroom, and an ensuite over here. Then with an open plan kitchen, that will be glass down there, glass down here, looking out on the open countryside. So
there you go. Some interesting opportunities there. We love this, actually. Agricultural buildings, and you seem pretty switched on with what you were going to do.
Yeah. Well, I had an idea originally when I purchased the site that I was just going to buy it. The Class Q was in place. I was going to develop it really quickly and move forward. But then, obviously, with Class Q, you only have a limited time to get these things developed. And after lockdown and after all these other things and everything was held up, to go and get my warranties in place, that normally takes seven days or so. 6 weeks later, I'm still haggling with all we need another drawing, It went on and on and on. And then by this stage, I thought, I've only got 2.5 months now to finish this development.
Wow. So this was the collateral warranties or the structural warranties?
Structural warranties.
Got it.
Yeah. And so I thought, this is... And then obviously I met you guys and we discussed where we could move forward. So at that stage, I was purely going to develop the site, the 2 units, and then change the one and finish the other Class Q. Then it became apparent that I could actually not get it done in the timescale, and if I don't get it done in the timescale, I lose my Class Q. I can't then get that back, so it was a bit difficult.
Just in case anyone who's listening or watching doesn't know it, explain Class Q to us.
So Class Q is the ability to convert an agricultural building under permitted development rights and it gives you a time frame of 3 years. There's a lot of stipulations. You can't change the exterior. It still ends up looking like a barn, essentially. But it will then have residential use. Now, the downside to this is with normal planning permission, for example, if you alleviated the conditions and you started it, it's extant, and you've got that forever. You've dug some foundations or whatever. With Class Q, you get 3 years.
To finish it.
If it's not finished...
By finishing, you mean with practical completion certificates and building control sign-off?
Correct.
Got it.
And then if you haven't finished it by that date, you've lost your planning permission. You then can't reapply for Class Q because it is no longer an agricultural building. So you've lost it. So it's
Wow.
so it's a big risk.
Good old UK planning system.
Yeah.
At its best.
Well, as they say, planning is easier now.
So presumably, if you lose your Class Q because you've just gone past the 3 years, you can still apply for residential consent.
Absolutely, but you are not guaranteed to get it, because the reason you had a Class Q is because it's not in the development zone. So Class Q gives you planning permission based on its agricultural use and its previous use and the permitted development rights.
And I get the impression that planners, in some instances, hate the fact they've got to offer Class Q.
Absolutely.
Because it's almost like, darn it, somebody's got away with building something residentially in an agricultural spot. So when it gets to day, 3 years, anyway, they're not going to go, well, don't worry, mate, you can have a couple of months. They're going to say, oh, well, not to worry, goodbye.
Yeah. And
all the money you put in at that point,
gone. It would be, yeah. So it's a very risky situation to make that decision. So I had no option to reapply for Class Q all over again. And I went through a whole hoop of, we'll go into what I actually did with the site presently. But so you then have to reapply, which gives you another option and another, you're sort of virtually guaranteed to get it because the site is still the same. It's still an agricultural building and so forth. But
and that resets the clock for another 3 years.
Yeah.
Got it.
I think it'd be really helpful for Scott to give his, lender's view on whether this would be lendable on your scheme of the 2 units. And there was a Class R in the middle, wasn't there, as well?
There wasn't, but the potential was there based on So you had the Class Q on the one end. You had some existing buildings which had planning permission to convert and then put a glass link. So it could look quite pretty, but costly. The glass link is always ridiculously expensive. So the build cost can be quite high in comparison. I think we ended up being quite conservative with our build costs based on figures, but they could have changed and whatever. So the had one conversion and one Class Q, but there was a big building in the middle, and we were quite convinced that we would get Class R, which is for commercial use. So it could be an architect's studio or whatever. Right. So you convert an agricultural building to a workshop or So that was the simplest option, which was virtually guaranteed. We had 2 guarantees and 1 good potential.
Let's get Scott's view on the site as we found you and found it.
Yeah.
Okay, so talk me through the numbers if you wouldn't mind, Stuart.
Sure.
So purchase price.
I bought the site for 300,000.
Okay, in 2021, is that right?
December
2021, okay. And then how much have you spent on it, getting the Class R, getting the Class Q?
The Class Q was on it when I bought it.
Oh, brilliant.
So
and when did that expire?
That will expired in May 22.
Wow. So you had some work cut out to actually get that
chance.
Well, I actually thought, I bought it in the December, I thought I could do with a new project.
Yes.
So I'll get my head down, hit the ground running in January, we'll have it done, no problem at all. The structure's there, it won't be an issue.
Okay.
And then obviously I started applying for my structural warranties, and so 10-year warranties, which would normally in the past has taken me 5 days, 7 days, whatever.
Yeah.
6 weeks later,
yeah,
I'm still chasing them up. Can we have another drawing? Can we have this? And it was just horrendous. And now I'm getting to the stage where I'm thinking, there's no way I'm going to be able to build this in the period of time.
Yeah.
Because with Class Q, the cut-off is 3 years and that's it.
Okay. So from a lending perspective, we'd look at the expiry dates of planning for whatever its got planning for.
Yeah.
And if there is, so if the planning expires within 6 months, okay, when someone's wanting to take the first drawdown, we deem that as being a material risk.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, because particularly where you've not got the option of making a material start to make the planning into perpetuity.
Yeah.
And Class Q, it runs that risk.
Yeah.
So from a lending perspective, we would not have lent until the Class Q had been renewed for a further 3 years.
Cool.
Well, that's really helpful, isn't it? So that site was actually completely unfinanceable, really, at that stage.
At that stage.
At that stage.
Not necessarily, because you still got the one which has the planning consent already granted.
Okay.
So
built it.
Again, without having lent, what I would have said is make a material start on the one where you got the planning consent to start.
Yeah.
Make that planning into perpetuity. Reapply for the planning for the Class Q to then have a planning for a further 3 years. At the same time, apply for the Class R to give you the same option on the commercial in the middle.
So that was how we found you.
Yes.
We then set off in the bus. And you remember the bus?
It was amazing.
It was amazing.
Tuk-tuk.
Yeah, the tuk-tuk. Yeah, it was a bit like a tuk.
But it had a cool Porsche engine.
Yeah, it had a cool Porsche. Did he prime you to say that?
No, I saw it. It was very smart.
So, purchase price 300,000 in 2021 with planning consent for residential conversion and one Class Q expiring in May 2022. A big risk. We've talked about that.
Yeah.
Okay. What were the end values of the properties and what were the build costs?
So the GDV was about 1.35 million.
Okay.
And at the time, the build costs was 560 to 580,000 because they were conversions, so they could be quite cost effective to do.
Yeah.
And we may have incurred additional expenses because what was what, but yeah.
So call it 600k.
Yeah.
Okay, including a small contingency. That stands you in at £900,000. So 300 purchase price, 600k for conversion build costs, 900k against a GDV of 1.35 million. Okay, which decent return, 35% return.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely
lendable.
Definitely lendable, subject to Class R, subject to renewing the Class Q, subject also to relevant experience of the people involved.
Yes.
And it might be worth just touching on, have you done this before?
Yes. Well, I've done lots of different types of development. I mean, my originally when I got into property, it was just buying a property to convert and so forth. Then I got into small development, small sites of 1 and 2, 3 houses. Yeah. And then because I was a jockey for many years, so I then
quite tall for a jockey.
I grew 2 inches after my 21st birthday, which is a good job I did, really, because I'm still quite short. But yeah, and I was probably because I had a weight issue, so I was always fighting and battling my weight. So then, because what you realise is that nobody could get anybody who understood horses to build. So you had builders who would stick a step in where you couldn't or whatever. So I then got into equestrian developments, and then it really sort of took off. I built yards for the British Olympic team. I built Carl Hester's yard, who's on the British Olympic team. We did the yard for the New Zealand team for the 2012 Olympics. I was then equestrian advisor on the Warhorse movie.
Oh, wow.
And No Man's Land, where all the barbed wire and the horse gets caught up. I created all that area. And after I did that, I thought, this dyslexic kid from a council estate who's just done a few buildings and stuff, if I can do that, I can do anything. And I decided I wasn't going to deal with any more clients in the equestrian world. I was just going to do small developments and work 3 days a week. You can imagine how that went. I now work 7 days a week. But yeah, so when I found this site, it was really, I've done lots of conversions on other properties, and we've done lots of small developments, and so yes, it was a very simple site. I didn't find the site. Somebody found it for me and said, look, I haven't got the money to build it. Would you buy it? And I said, yeah, I'll buy it, no problem.
Okay. What's interesting is that the very first development that Roma Finance ever funded in 2015 was the conversion of an equestrian centre into residential with a groomsman's residence.
Yeah.
And that was the first one we ever did, and it was for a former Olympic show jumper.
And the thing is, the planning opportunities within the equestrian world are phenomenal.
Yes.
I mean, I've got planning. I had a client of mine who had a site where they bought for £150,000, had no, they had planning permission turned down twice. And they said, could you get me planning? Wow. And I said, in the green belt.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, guarantee. I won't charge you anything unless I do.
Yep.
I got them planning permission for 24 indoor stables, an indoor riding arena, an outdoor school, and a 4-bedroom house.
One further question. Of that 900k, so the £300,000 purchase price, and the 600k conversion and build cost, how much of that 900 would you have needed to borrow?
I would have probably made logical and business sense to utilise development finance to develop it.
Okay, for the full 600,000.
Yeah.
Okay, that's doable, which is roughly 2/3 of the total cost. So the loan to cost would be about 67%. Lenders generally will lend somewhere between 75 and 85% of a full loan to cost. So the fact that you're at 60, 2/3, 67%, you're well within tolerances. Okay, and in terms of the loan to GDV, by the time you then add the interest on top of the loan to cost, as long as, and different lenders have different views, but somewhere between 65 and 70% of the end value, okay, is where lenders feel comfortable. Yeah. So if you're looking to borrow effectively £600,000 of full development cost, by the time you have the interest on top, okay, let's say that's, I don't know, for argument's sake, £100,000. Yeah. Okay, so it stands you in at 700k on an end value of 1.35. You're well within limits. Yeah. Yeah, it's a perfectly lendable deal, and I would have done that deal every day of the week. Really particularly helpful. Based on your experience.
Yeah. Really helpful. And those percentages, I think, are really helpful for people watching at home that are looking to acquire a site. Yes. To understanding their lending capabilities on that site, based on the end value and the costs of building it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Super helpful.
Yeah.
Well, that was how things were when we met Stuart. And we then set off in the bus.
The limousine.
Do you remember that?
I do. Yeah, it's amazing.
It was like a Rolls-Royce Phantom.
Did anybody have to push?
Luxury.
Not in this instance. But we set off and we took Stuart to what we thought was a really interesting opportunity. Again, the main thing about mentors, property mentors, is Nick and I are trying to just open the eyes to other possibilities that are out there. And this was, I think, a little bit of a doozy. Yeah. So let's take a look at what we showed Stuart.
Here we are. Don't focus too much on the decor.
No.
It's beautiful.
So I bet you're wondering what is going on here. It's one of those classic right place, right time. Because what we've got here are 2 bungalows which just happen for a twist of fate or whatever to be being sold at the same time. Independent people, so different owner, and sadly both of them are probate sales. So, somebody's obviously lost a family member and they're now being sold. The key with this one is the combination of the two opens up some really interesting possibilities. So in this instance, what we're thinking about is this not as 2 bungalows, but as a development plot. So, what in hindsight, it was exciting on the day. Tell us what you thought about what we showed you there.
I thought it was a great opportunity. I think the site lent itself to everything that you said. It was great to find that you had one bungalow that was for sale and the other one would sell. So probably the only thing is making sure that deal worked with the 2 of them. But the opportunity and opening your eyes up to just having some small little bungalows could have potential. So the potential and the deal and the potential it had was great.
So talk Scott through the numbers, Nick, because it was a really interesting one, especially when it comes to the terrace houses.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the value in this site was spotting the opportunity of marriage value. Because one bungalow, you wouldn't be able to develop much more than another property, maybe a couple of semis on it. So, it wouldn't have really made much return, and certainly probably from Scott's perspective, there wouldn't have been enough meat on the bone to warrant that. But the 2 together suddenly got very, very exciting. So we we're looking at a purchase price of around about 305,000 per unit.
Yeah, so
for the
610
two beds,
yeah,
so 610
yeah.
altogether. End value we were estimating around sort of 220 to 230,000 per unit.
So somewhere between 2.6 and
But
2.8 million
but
GDV.
take a step back.
So
the idea was to knock them both
down and build a row of terraces.
And what would have been
12.
the build cost of those 12 properties, Nicholas?
Well, roughly, you've obviously got the 12 houses. If we're saying around about 75 square metres per unit,
Okay.
and around about £1,500 per square metre.
Okay, for that part of the country, that
roughly
sounds...
about 1.35 million.
Okay, for that part of the country, that sounds
1.3 to 1.4.
reasonable. Okay.
Yeah.
And was planning in place?
No.
Okay.
So it was a minor thing to overcome there, just knock them down and build them.
Any Class Q or Class R are required?
Yeah, but you know what? These were amenable owners.
Yes.
They had time. They were living there.
Yes.
I think one of them was regrettably through probate. Thank you, that's the word.
Yeah.
And so, subject to planning offer
Yeah.
would have been our first suggestion.
It was on a main road. I think highways wouldn't have had any issues. Issues have been careful.
Straight road.
Straight road, so
No
you would have-
visibility issues.
No, I think you would have done a slight cutaway, but
Yeah.
No
but-
major overlooking either.
No.
So we would have carried the terrace line on, which was already residential to the left. And there was no
fantastic.
major overlooking at the rear. There was a kind of
Okay.
a
Flat site?
perpendicular. Yeah, it was pretty flat. Very
Really
slight
from the
slope.
front to the back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very
Okay.
slight slope.
Not horrendous.
Okay, so
Nothing,
services
just
wouldn't have been an
grading.
issue.
No.
Not at all.
And so GDV on that is quite a lot.
Yeah, 2.6 to 2.8 million, depending on.
Yeah.
Okay. So just looking at the numbers, so purchase price 610 for the two.
Yeah.
Okay. Plus the 1.35. Okay. Roughly speaking, stands you in at 2 million. Slightly less, but it's 2 million quid.
Yeah.
Okay. Against a sale price of 2.6 to 2.8. Again, a really healthy profit.
Yeah.
So, a viable deal. It's certainly, in some ways, simpler than a barn conversion.
But then that would have been, your lending on that would obviously been subject to planning. Yeah.
100%. And I wouldn't, although having said that,
We could have got a bridge loan, right, to buy it?
yeah, so one of the things with this is that because there are already 2 bungalows there.
With the value.
With the value, and presumably there's land around them as well.
Yep.
And if they're older people, then there may have been some tarting up to be done, particularly if one's in probate. Then you've already got intrinsic value in the existing properties that are there. So if the planning hadn't come through, it wouldn't have been too
Downside's not
difficult.
too bad.
Yeah, it would have been too difficult to give them a lick of paint and do some.
And in fact, I think what we were talking about at the time, from memory, was actually using those as just quick buy-to-lets whilst we got the planning.
Yeah.
And that would have brought some of the
Yes, I would have thought, and don't forget, once you get planning for 12 units on a site that you're buying, all of a sudden vendors can start to up the ante in terms of what they want from a site.
Yeah.
So again, going back to what Nicholas you were saying, buying those bungalows, doing a very light touch refurb on them, putting some tenants in there whilst you apply for planning consent on short ASTs.
Yeah.
Okay, actually you're de-risking the scheme.
Cool.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So you would have lent on that?
Yeah, so the way that I would have done that deal is that I would have probably done either a bridge for purchase, or if you felt it might have taken more than a year to have gotten planning, I might have done a buy-to-let
Yeah, okay.
on the 2 bungalows.
Yeah.
Okay.
What loan to value would you have given on that?
It depends. There's 2 things it depends on. So maximum loan to value would have been 75%.
Yeah.
But we also stress test the rent that comes in to make sure that the rent can service the payments at 1.25 times the pay rate.
Cool.
Okay, so that might have been the deciding factor on what we could have lent. So sometimes the LTV ends up being lower than 75% because it won't stress test based on the rents that are passing from the properties.
So realistically, if I'd have put 200,000 into the deal and came to you, you'd have said, yeah, quite happy, we'll lend on that.
Yeah.
We could then have created the environment that Nick was talking about, have some tenants in there.
And you're not under pressure. So if you don't get the planning that you want first time around, you've got time to appeal it because you're not under any pressure. And when you take a bridge and it's subject to planning coming through, your bridge starts becoming expensive quite quickly.
And it's like driving a Tesla then, and you're saying, oh, my electric's running out.
Yeah. So the way that I would have structured this is would have done a buy-to-let.
Yeah.
bought them without planning consent. Buy to let whilst you're applying for planning consent. Keep the tenants in there whilst you're getting the planning consent. Then, obviously, once the planning comes through, serve notice, you get vacant possession.
Yeah.
And then I would have then converted the buy-to-let loan into a development loan,
Yeah.
and then funded in arrears of works done.
And that's great when you can do that. For example, if you're using one lender, like
Yeah.
yourselves, or a specialist lender,
Yeah.
it's great that you can then convert one loan into another,
Yeah.
as opposed to having to go through that whole
Absolutely.
procedure again. And that sort of marries really well.
And the beauty is that if you had a retention strategy, so you wanted to keep the 12 terraces
Yeah.
and rent them out at the end, I could then have converted the development loan back into a buy-to-let at the end.
Yeah.
You know, so you would have had the same lender all the way through, no valuation risk, no legal risk, and no bridge risk, because you've got the right product for the right property at the right time.
Excellent.
So it sounds like a jolly good deal. Tell us what you decided to do,
Well,
Stuart.
it's not what I decided to do, it's what I did. So I then thought, actually, it is a great deal, and the numbers work, and you were both right, and it was a great site, and everything worked, except for the actual planning permission itself. Because, yes, the site was level, and there was all these other elements that were in its favour. I felt that purchasing it, you know, as you said, would be a great opportunity. There was no uplift in that. So you were not taking any risk. You wouldn't lose any money, but you are investing £600,000 or whatever in taking a chance to do whatever. So I felt that this really warranted the opportunity to go to the planners and say, look, let's just have a look at some pre-app advice.
Sensible.
And what you would accept and what you wouldn't accept and so forth. We looked at 12 terraces and they would definitely not accept them. They said it was overdevelopment. It didn't conform to policy. It didn't conform to other areas of their policy. And then there was we looked at 3 different ways of actually creating the site, but there was a block of flats at the back, and then where they overlooked, that would change the dimensions of how we had to put and where where these properties could be. But without going into great detail, the long and short of it is we would have probably ended up with knocking the bungalows down, getting 2 detached houses. They would have allowed houses and instead of just bungalows that were they were happy with that, and 2 on the front. For me, the numbers didn't really then work. The opportunity to get 12 terraces, the numbers, the figures worked and everything worked. But, you know, and as councils are saying now, we're making things easier for you with planning.
It's just another story, isn't it? I mean, it's sad to hear this now after the event, because our scheme was viable.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have been overdevelopment. You've got a terrace already, so you're just extending.
We have a quiet word
terrace.
anyway.
And you've got 3 terraces.
So it just goes to show.
Yeah, within the area there were 3 terraces.
The 75 square metres for each of the terraces, was that a similar square meterage to the ones that were already there adjacent?
There was some ex-local authority in which they built those quite generously many years gone by, so they would have actually been bigger.
Okay.
So so they weren't out of proportion; they were within proportion. It would have changed the dynamics of the site. It would have been a very different view. But there was a lot of opportunities where it should have gone forward. And I think now we're talking about planning being easier. I don't see it as that much easier myself, but they're saying it should be easier. You know, we should be looking at schemes where and I think. But the good thing is, because housing authorities don't have their housing stock in place now, having to show sort of demonstrative effect that this is going to be, that it's easier for now for developers, hopefully, to say to planners, it's more difficult for you now to prove that this shouldn't be there. And I think that's where we're gradually getting to. We're not there yet, but that's where we're getting to. So it was a good site to fulfil the boys' opportunity. What they put forward, if that could have been had, which should have been able to have been had, would have been a great deal.
Thank you for at least pursuing it.
Yeah, it's a shame, and great advice, to go with the pre-app route. I'm sure if we'd gone and followed you on your journey, that's a bit of advice we would have given you. No risk. Otherwise you'd been stuck with these, and you'd have had to resell them and made no money. So pre-app advice is for the benefit of people at home, is where you put in a very cut down version of a planning, usually just floor plans, maybe a covering letter from your architect, maybe some elevations, just to get a meeting with them, usually within 56 days. I think most councils work to, although that's out the window with most councils at the moment because they're overworked and they just say they're not accepting them, which is frustrating.
No, and also
it's a useful process.
But what I find with the pre-app applications now is that it's about gaining information and finding where we sit. Do we all agree on this and so on?
Yeah,
and
getting support.
And every statement is, well, obviously, we can't guarantee this, and obviously it's
limited.
It's very, very limited. But at the end of the day, I think at least you're having a conversation with the planners, and you can gauge what you'll be up against.
It's interesting you say that. If I can add one point here,
Yeah.
The other route might have been, and there are always two routes, to go a full app route, but fully supported with all of the appropriate consultants reports, highways reports, contamination reports, and go in hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes then you're giving the council less opportunity to refuse it. Because if you've answered all of their policy inquiries, if you've followed every policy and you've got every report to answer it, you've been put off at pre-app because they've said, no, we just want 2 houses. I mean, I don't, this is the risk of pre-app is that you'll be put off, and so I guess sometimes a site, when we recommend pre-app, it's where you need to get the council on board to something that they really can't refuse, and actually a well-prepared pre-app, and I don't know if you did this, I'm not saying you did or you didn't, almost preparing a pre-app as well as a full application with all of those reports, gets rid of the ambiguity. So, unfortunately, if you do put a weak pre-app in, it's a great way of maybe getting a gauge on something a little bit more simple. On the bigger sites like this, where you need 12 terrace houses, I'd almost have submitted the full app as a pre-app. So they can't come back and say, well, what about it? We'd rather have 2 houses. Well, we don't care about 2 houses. We want 12. That's the only thing that's viable. Absolutely. We've done all the reports. It supports it. Why don't, let's get on board with this.
I think you're 100% right, and you have to go into greater detail. The reason that we went down the pre-app route and looked at it, there was 3 policies against it that went against it.
Okay.
So therefore, we knew that was going to be slightly difficult. So it was just So it was basically just going, have we got a chance of overcoming this?
And what were those 3 things for the benefits of the people watching?
It was the policy of size and mass.
Okay.
And also the positioning, the light and sight and so forth. But the only thing that was, and they also had, in 2022, their housing stock was actually far better.
Oh God, yeah, that's one.
Than now.
Yeah.
So therefore you didn't have that argument. Whereas now, where most councils, and this particular council has now has a 4.6 year, which they need to have a minimum of 5 years. They're only 4.6 years ahead. So in realistic terms, you would have a greater argument now than I would have done at that stage.
And so just to clarify, each council has a provision of housing they have to deliver as part of a target to provide homes that are needed in the UK. At the time, they had hit those targets, and therefore there was no incentive to approve new planning applications.
Well, again, had they hit them, the thing is, what they had to do in those days is they say they hit their targets, but actually when you deep dive into the developments, some of these developments were never going to happen in that time scale. And now obviously they've changed how they work.
Approved applications, maybe.
Where are they? Where are things at now? Have the bungalows been sold? Are they still on the market? Do we know?
You'll have to ask Stuart.
Yes, the one sold. And because the other thing was, there were 2 bungalows. One was for sale and the other one wasn't for sale.
Yes.
And the boys had found these people and said, well, would you sell? And they said, well, yes, we would sell. So again, that was another thing. You would have to create the contract that they would happen simultaneously. And So there was a few, well, like you said, at the time you said that there's nothing is easy. If it's easy, there's nothing in it. So
Everyone else would be doing it, wouldn't they?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, so the one had sold and the other one didn't sell.
Okay.
They stayed there. But I think they were only going to sell when the neighbours sold because there was, it was simple.
So the opportunity is really no longer there at the moment.
No, it doesn't sound like it. No, and I think they would have sold because they'd have got a little bit more for their property than the market value.
Quite.
Because we could have paid a little bit more because of the marriage value.
Yeah. I think so. That, yeah, on when we're getting back to when we were talking about on paper or actual and so on, the first thing that they have to work on paper, and on paper they worked, and then it's going through the detail of making it work. Then,
So let's move on to now.
Yes.
What did you do?
Well, I took your advice.
Right.
On looking at more opportunities because
With your existing...
with my existing site.
Right.
And, the one thing we discussed is looking at the existing planning permission, and the heritage officer was not overly happy with the existing site and the scheme. He had to pass it because Class Q, it conformed under permitted development rights, and the other property would convert. So he had no options really. But I used this to my advantage and then contacted the heritage officer, and I said, look, you really don't like this scheme, do you? It's ugly. It's not what. And he said, well, I can't really say. I've passed it and I'm happy with it. And I said, well, I think it's hideous. I said, I think what we could do, and I said, quoting your words in your statement, is that we could have something which is more in keeping to the listed building which is adjacent, which was the neighbouring property. And I said, I think we could put together a scheme that would be more in keeping and more pleasant on the eye than these existing ugly barns and so forth. And he said, well, yes, I would. And he said, I can't say anything official, but I would, yes, be very supportive of such a scheme.
Great.
Excellent. So now I thought, this is fabulous. So I will now go to the council and say I want to apply for 4 houses on this site. I'm going to, and we'll demolish the site and we'll do this. No, we don't want you to do that. You can't have that. And I said, well, this is what I want to do. I'll put a full application in, and no, you're outside the build zone, you're outside the development zone. Excellent. Okay. So we'll now have to do what we have to do. So I reapplied for Class Q. And once I reapplied for Class Q, that gave me my 2 buildings back again. My fallback position was that I said that I could convert that 1 building into 3 dwellings under permitted development rights under Class Q. Therefore, my fallback position is I have 4 dwellings on the site, but they're hideous and they're ugly. No, you have to show. I said, well, I only have to demonstrate that I have a fallback position under planning law. No, we want full planning. So I now have to go in for planning permission again. So I've now done planning permission 3 times.
Crikey.
I've now got planning permission for 3 1-bedroom houses, and they're really sought after in the middle of the countryside. It's so I got planning permission by default.
Yeah. When you say planning permission for that was a permitted development application?
Yeah, but it was a resubmitted permitted development application for 3 houses.
Yeah.
But then I that was under the 56-day rule.
Yep.
Anyway, I submitted it, and then I had, and then I said, right, okay, we have to. This is what we require. They were going to refuse it on highways, so I already had a highways permission, and they were going to refuse it on highways, and I said, okay, that's great. The application ended on a Friday. The 56 days was up on a Friday, and they sent me an email on the Friday to say it was going to be refused, which was fabulous because they never sent me a letter because it was a bank holiday until the following Tuesday. So they sent me a letter on the Tuesday saying, we're refusing it. And I said, well, unfortunately, you can't refuse it because you're out of time. Well, we informed you. I said, no, you have to inform me in writing. And the letter wasn't sent until the Tuesday. So somebody in the office decided to send it on the Tuesday. So I legally had planning permission then for 3 dwellings on that site. Because
and they accepted that?
They had no option. Yeah, they had to accept it.
Wow.
So what was the planning for? 3 1-bedroom houses?
Yeah, so what the planning would be for is that the existing Class Q was 1 big long building. So now we divided it into 3 properties. Now, as long as you conform to the minimum standard sizes, they can't refuse it.
Which is 37 square metres for
Yeah.
a studio one bed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these were one bed houses, and we had more than that. We had 46 square meters per whatever I think it was. So they had to pass it, but they could refuse it on other things. They refused it on highways, but that was overcome because they didn't refuse it in the time. So therefore, I had permitted development rights because they only
That's
had
lucky, isn't it?
wasn't luck.
How is it luck?
Well, because even if they had refused it within the time, we had the opportunity to overcome it because they needed more. There was another piece of information they required, and we got that information to them on the Thursday, and so it could never have been posted in time anyway.
Okay.
Right.
What about the Class R? What did you do with the Class R?
So the Class R was what we were going to do originally if we'd have developed these two properties. So then what we did is we didn't utilise the Class R, and so I then went back in for full planning permission based on that we now have 4 properties on the site legally. We have the conversion, and now we have the 3 one-bedrooms.
Yeah.
So now I'll go back to the planners and say, right, I now have my fallback position.
Which I told you I had previously.
Yeah.
But just didn't have the permission.
And you
in
told me
place.
I needed it in force, so it's now in force. So I now want to clear the site, smash the site down, and build 4 brand new houses.
Or nice houses.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you have a better development. So I knew straight away I had the heritage officer on my side because he would have conformed.
Yeah.
So they couldn't go against the design as long as I had him in at design level, which I did. They couldn't go against the design. They couldn't go against anything to do with highways or wherever, because a 1-bedroom property has as much right as a 3-bedroom property. So therefore, there was no way they could refuse it.
Nice.
Excellent. So I thought.
Oh no.
So I put the planning.
This is such a lesson for people watching.
Yeah.
About the strategic nature and the way in which you are going about a process over a period of time.
Yeah. So I then put the planning permission. Highways were then going to refuse it on access because they said it's now they base it that the probability of an accident is more likely because there's more properties and more cars on this particular site. This access.
How could you ever argue against that? Of course.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Well, yeah. So a tractor coming out of this thing has been coming out for 30 years, and something huge and so on. Whereas you can have a small car and you've got perfect visibility space. Anyway, I had to overcome that by the neighbouring landowner. I approached them and said, look, we want to put something in place that you're not going to grow a tree or build a house in this gateway that you've got. So I had that put in place. I said, withhold the planning permission. Do not refuse it until I get this in place. I got that in place, and then we got full planning permission. We didn't get We didn't get full planning permission for smashing it all down because the heritage officer came in and said, I just want this one little building to stay, which is going to be a kitchen. So that's fine with the big glass doors and so on.
Okay, so you got 4 3-bedroom properties.
No, I got 3 3-beds and 1 4-bed.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, and I did them all only as single story. So the great thing is, if to uplift the value, there is no way that they would not allow, I'm sure, a 1.5 story or a dormer.
Yeah.
So you could actually go back in now. You've got full planning permission for 4 dwellings and 3 of them.
And what did that do to the build cost and the GDVs, Stuart?
So the GDV is 2.4 million.
Okay.
The build cost now will be 1.3. 1.3.
1.3.
With a demolition.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So that's 575. So if I look at it 1 second. So your build cost before were 600.
Yes.
Okay, and then now 1.3.
Yeah.
So your build costs are 700k more.
Yeah.
Your GDV has gone from 1.35 to 2.4, which is an uplift of 950. Okay, so ignoring the shag and hassle, the time, the extra expense in terms of planning, what have you.
Yeah.
Actually, you're spending an extra £700,000 to gain an extra 950. Great deal. Well done.
So where are you at now?
I'm selling it.
You're going to sell it, okay? After all
With the
that.
benefit of the planning consent.
Yes.
So what's it on the market for?
So
what?
Well, I was going to ask you how you would value it. That would be a really interesting thing, Nick.
Well, I can answer that one. Mainly comparables. You're building family homes here, so I'd be getting in at least 3 to 5 local agents, and one of those being a decent national agent as well.
Yeah.
So a mix of local agents and a slightly bigger national agent in one of the bigger towns.
Yeah.
Because they might bring people from further afield. And just do extensive comparable analysis on both a price per square foot basis, but also on a aesthetic look. Sometimes people buy with their heart, so it depends. I'd be looking at the design. And seeing how they're built from an architectural standpoint, and are they unique, or are they farmhouse? How does that compare to other units of a similar size? So it's not just about exact numbers on price per square foot. It's about the design, the layout, the views. And I remember this site had, I think, fairly reasonable views out of it.
Really,
it was on
good.
a hill,
back. And
looking down.
Yeah.
So you're going to be, hopefully at the top end of the range with those views.
Well, you're also in the grounds-ish of that wonderful old building.
Yeah, there's a big old
mansion.
manor
Oh,
house,
beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay. So going back to the question, what are you looking to sell the site for with the benefit of the planning for the four houses?
So, and just as a matter of interest, is there a rule of thumb for this? So let's say we've got these four buildings, which we've now, using Nick's advice, gone out to the local market and said, how much of these work? And they've come back. We're going to have to guess all this stuff, aren't we? Let's say they've come back and they've said, between them, they're worth, round numbers, 2.4 million for that. Okay. So what are you? And we know that the development costs of that were what?
1.35.
1.3. So that's 900 odd.
Yeah. So there's profit to be made as well.
What would you value the site at?
Oh, it's a really difficult one, because as a surveyor, and going back to what Nicholas was saying, you've no idea. It used to be going back years that people would work on a third. Okay, I think those days are long gone. Okay, and part of it depends on the cycle as well, into the economic cycle as to where we are. But the site value might be up to 40%. It might be as low as 20%, depending on where we are in the cycle.
Of what? Of GDV?
In terms of the economic cycle. So
in terms of
GDV. In terms of GDV. So basically, somewhere between 500, and $1 million, and that's a very, very wide range. But the bottom line is you've paid 300. Okay, you've spent on it to get the planning consent.
Yes, the planning consents cost me 48 grand.
Okay.
And a lot of effort.
My time,
and a lot of effort.
energy, and blah, blah. And I'm selling the site for 600,000.
Oh, you are?
Oh, wow,
okay.
that sounds like a cheap price.
Yeah. Well, the whole point is that I think now I've realised I wanted to use the site as a bit of a project to work out how much time and energy you can put in, and from these guys, that we had a conversation there, and you said, what do you put your time into? How much is your time worth?
Yes.
And so forth. And developing things, you're tied to a site.
You are indeed. But can I, if I can, hopefully give a word of wisdom, if I may?
Yes.
You've already identified that these single-story units can be made more.
Yes.
Can be made into a mezzanine or a dormer by putting, going into the roof space. So there's upside potential on the GDV. At 600k, based on current GDV, you're selling that for 25% of the end value, which seems cheap, if I'm honest. I'd be tempted to say to a buyer, look, I'm selling it for 600k, but I want an overage in the event of you getting more than 2.4 million for the site.
Yeah.
So you want a percentage of the upside, because I'd have thought that whoever's buying it for 600k, actually they stand to make a lot of money, because they buy it for 600, spend 1.3, it stands them in at 900, and they're going to get at least 2.4 without the dormers.
Just to keep some of your effort and all that kind of stuff there.
Yeah.
Is there a possibility to go into a joint venture with somebody where you offer the land and you agree at the start that it's worth at least 600,000, and they put in all the development finance and they put in all the work? You basically go away and have a holiday for a year and a half.
That'd be really pleasant.
And then you share the uplift based on what they put into it.
I think Sally knows a great builder.
Yeah, I think. Sally, who we spoke to in the previous episode.
I think we'll leave him.
We spoke to Sally in the previous episode. She didn't have a good time with the builder.
Yeah.
But on the assumption you get a good one, that could give you even more of an upside, perhaps.
Yeah.
I don't know what. Clearly, that's a longer game.
Yes.
And you're not going to get your £600,000 out to do other things with.
Yeah.
Opportunity cost. But on the other hand, you've worked so hard at this. It's like part of me's going, oh gosh, I want to see you get some of that massive uplift.
Yeah.
I considered developing it, but the reason...
No, I'm not talking about you developing it. I'm talking about you being a silent partner in a development.
Yeah. I think I would probably... How I would look at that is I would say that I would look at releasing some capital from it. And then by releasing capital, or even releasing the capital I put in, and then there's more up there for everyone concerned, and being involved in that way, definitely. But I think I've got to the stage where I had to fight an uphill battle, like you're saying, jump through so many hoops to get there.
You're sick of it, basically.
I did, well, and also I've got other opportunities that I want to put my energy into. So, but I'm not saying that wouldn't be, but it's something to look at, and I think that comes down to numbers, doesn't it? You know.
That's interesting.
Very good.
It always has to come down to the numbers.
It does.
Yes.
I'm afraid.
Well, listen, thank you for bringing us up to speed.
Yes.
Congratulations in terms of sticking it out, and what a journey that was. The planners. I mean, what do you think about that, Nick? Even by our standards, that was a battle and a half.
You've got more patience than I have, I think. I mean, I like to do a multiple planning gain, incremental planning gain scenario, but yeah, you've been through the middle of it, and it's just such a shame that the law on planning is as it is.
And that logic sometimes and sense doesn't necessarily see the light of day in all instances.
Absolutely.
No.
So
Great.
beware if you're out there with planning gain. Get the right advice, get the right planning consultants, and build your application robustly before you go to the council. It'll give you the best possible chance of getting planning early.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stuart.
No problem.
Thank you, Scott,
Thank you.
from Roma Finance.
Thank you.
And I am Martin Roberts, and this is Nicholas Wallwork. We are the Property Mentors. Check out Property Mentors on propertymentors.tv, or head to YouTube, Amazon Prime, I think, and Freeview. You'll find it in all those places. And there'll be another podcast where we dig down deep into some of the details of what happened to the people we featured in Series 1. And just a bit of a snippet, there will be a Series 2 of Property Mentors. Keep your eyes peeled for that. But for now, goodbye.
Take care.